Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into Devy wide receivers. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to go through a few things, but the main thing we're going to focus on tonight is the state of Devy wide receivers. I was looking at it the other day, and I said, you know what? It's looking pretty damn ugly. And, we got a lot to talk about. Not to say that there's no good players, not to say that there's no one that we should care about or anything like that. But, we might even get into a little strategy talk, like maybe we start selling away some of these 25, 26, 27 picks, things like that, in our dynasty leagues, because it's starting to look a little gross. But how do you feel about it, Aaron?
No, I mean, I think you make really good points there. And it's always interesting how the season goes. Like, we're always optimistic coming in. And then sometimes we figure out, oh, wait, not everybody didn't take a step forward. That happens every year. It's something that we are seeing here as well. So not every year should we anticipate all these freshmen who had promising beginnings to just continue on that trajectory. Sometimes they fall flat on their face, regress. Sometimes they blow up. That's why we do this. We try to peg the guys who are set for that huge meteoric rise.
Absolutely. So, I think I've asked you this somewhat recently, but I guess I'll ask you again. We don't talk that often as far as, podcasts go. So, how are you feeling about Devy in general? I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm just gonna say, how do you feel about Devy in general?
Yeah. So to clarify the question a little bit here too, are you saying as a fantasy football format or just the Devy landscape?
Yeah, as far as, like the Devy players, I don't mean like how you feeling about Devy football or anything like that, but how are you feeling about the Devy players that we're going to be adding to our dynasty rosters in the next 1 to 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, even just zooming out to like Devy fantasy football, for me, it's like Campus to Cadden is taking it to that next level. I don't currently even have Devy leagues just because I like to go even deeper into the C2C format. But absolutely, just like the landscape within Devy or college prospects right now, it's interesting. I will say that there are some solid players in this upcoming class, but man, it has not necessarily filled out quite in the same way as everybody perhaps expected. There's still plenty of uncertainty. We had that coming into the season. We saw that at the quarterback position. Nobody really felt that great about drafting some of those quarterbacks in the first round for startups, for example, and nobody's necessarily emerged to that degree. People have emerged and people have fallen as well, but man, it is an unproven just landscape out there. And part of our podcast here, just to give a little teaser, is going to be the state of the wide receivers, and not only the 25 class, but jumping into the 26 and 27 class as far as outlooks there. 26 really drops off. And though we have some very promising true freshmen, I just, said a minute ago how not everybody is going to continue to take that step forward. There's injuries, there's suspensions, there's other reasons, other competition that can really stall the flashes that these young guys present as well. So yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, but that's what we're here to figure out and try to lead everybody to making the right decisions.
Absolutely. I didn't want, like I said, I didn't want to put words in your mouth. That's basically how I feel about the Devy landscape as well. I didn't want to lead the witness. So it's just kind of gross right now. And I guess we kind of knew that going into the season, but we were hoping that maybe there was going to be some, some randos that kind of jumped up and did, and like took over. And that has happened to a certain extent. I feel like maybe the bad part is most of those players, I guess it's not that much of a shock, but most of those players have been upperclassmen. have been like 2025, possible draft picks and things. So it's not really helping the future classes. So it's like, all right, cool. Yeah. Like we can start feeling a little bit better about 2025. 2026 still feels pretty gross. And then, 2027 is years away, but, yeah, I don't know. We'll get into the state of the wide receivers here in a little bit, but actually, first, I wanted to do an underrated Devy section. I wanted to see if we wanted to go through and just, pick, because the Devy landscape does feel a little gross right now. Do we want to go and pick out some underrated players so that we can try to, help the consumers here, help the listeners here, find some of those players that maybe they can go trade for, try to get added to their teams, whether it's Devy or C2C. And that way we can, honestly, it's something I wanted to focus on too, because, I started thinking about it. I'm like, there's some players that I really like that just really aren't on people's radars. And I really have not done a good job of like going out and actually trying to acquire them. So I want to actually try to do it this week.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to be able to acquire those underrated guys that you've had an eye on, and the issue is going out and trying to trade for them. They're on somebody's roster already for a reason. Somebody else also saw them as like, "Ooh, I'm first to the market. I'm very much high on this guy. I'm going to draft him, or I'm going to pick him up off of waivers in a given league." And that can be kind of hard to pry that new asset that's been looking really quite good or underratedly promising off of somebody who just selected them, or picked them up, whatever. But it's worth it. I mean, especially when you see a guy's trajectory and you're like, wow, he could actually be maybe top 10 at the position, or whatever it is. And people are not necessarily catching on that quickly. So there are definitely some players out there that we should highlight here. Why don't you give us maybe your first underrated player? It can be at any position you like there, John.
Sure. Well, I guess I'm going to start with a wide receiver here, and it's one. It goes back to we did the hot take episode during the off season, or yeah, like right before the season started. We did our hot takes, and one of my hot takes was, and you said it was Diablo. You said it was basically the spiciest it could possibly be. One of my hot takes was Jordan Tyson would end up being ranked higher by consensus than Zachariah Branch by the time the season was over. I don't know if we're there yet, but we're definitely moving in the right direction to be getting to that point. Now, like I said, I don't know if we're actually there yet. Unfortunately, Devy analysts are extremely slow to react, and so getting the consensus on board is going to take a little more time. But if we just look at what Jordan Tyson's been doing, this year, it's looking pretty good. And some of it, some of these games that he's been doing in the past few weeks are actually against some like decent opponents. So it's not like he's just going up and beating up Nichols or or whoever, Tulane or whatever. Like, so he had 6 for 120 yards and a touchdown against Texas State. Okay, wow. But then he has 6 for 76 and 2 touchdowns against Kansas. Okay, that's a little bit better. 5 for 84 and a touchdown against Utah. Okay, we can, that's a solid team, solid defense and everything. 6 for 108 against Cincinnati this past week, or their last game. I think they were on a bye this week. So, but like, it's just consistently being the top guy on his team, consistently putting up, close to 100 yards, right around 100 yards and a touchdown every week. I think we have to start saying, like, this guy should be considered one of the higher end guys in his class, which technically he's in the 2025 class, but I don't think he's coming out this year. So I think technically he's going to be a 2026 guy when it's all said and done, unless something crazy happens these last like few weeks and he just blows up and all of a sudden he's all over the place. But I think the point is he's underrated because the way that his college career has happened, he's just been off of people's radars. And that's why it seemed like insane when I said the take. Like, Jordan Tyson's going to be ranked higher than Zachariah Branch when it's all said and done. And it was a hot take. I mean, it wasn't meant to be a guarantee or anything like that. But Zachariah Branch has not done all that much this year. Here we go. We have Jordan Tyson looking like a stud. But Tyson started out really hot at Colorado. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL after only 6 games. Then he missed basically all of last year. And so that's when he completely fell off people's radars, because it's like, who is this guy? You know, he's just completely, you know, he's gone. He's nothing. Well, now he's back. You know, he has almost 500 yards. Like I said, he has 4 touchdowns. He's looking like a solid contributor in an offense that hasn't been like firing on all cylinders either. It's not like they've just been like crushing opponents or anything like that. So he's doing really well within his own offense. And because of that, I really think that Jordan Tyson's somebody that you need to get on your radar and try to get on your teams, because I really do think he's underrated.
Yeah, good call there. And well, even going back to that hot takes episode, great call, right? As something that I rated as Diablo, right? We were rating each other's takes. For you to hit on one of those ones that was at that time, you know, considered so extreme or hot or whatever you want to say, that's impressive for sure. And yeah, I'm not going to necessarily go more into Tyson. I think you explained his production, his path, I guess, for why he was ranked so low. But now he's proving that he's back healthy. And not only that, but he's just taking that next step and really putting up numbers, which unfortunately, like a guy such as Zachariah Branch is not at this time. It's too bad. But just that system and maybe him as a player is just not going to be quite what we expected. But yeah, Jordan Tyson, great call there for underrated guys. Now I could go a couple different directions with this, but I'll go with a true freshman wide receiver. I'll stick with the position. I'll go Malcolm Simmons, Auburn wide receiver. I just think that, you know, all the hype for some of these other true freshmen is leaving Simmons not necessarily getting the attention I think he deserves. Now, I'll see his name occasionally out there now. He's starting to get a little bit more traction, but for him, he's been one of the most impressive true freshmen out there in the SEC. I mean, he's not up there with like a Ryan Williams. No, he's not that type of a talent, but he is a very good player. Now, I think that his involvement as a true freshman at Auburn, when they have Perry Thompson, when they have Cam Coleman, is very impressive. And, you know, I mean, the guy's stats, they're very solid, and he's just consistently involved within the offense right away. I mean, that's just been sticking out to me, and he has great athleticism. Like, his athleticism is certainly underrated, and I think he's going to be a big part of that talented receiving core of the future there at Auburn. So Malcolm Simmons is a guy who has caught my eye as underrated. Let's see, within my ranks themselves, I can look here really quickly, but Simmons, I have him now within my top 30 Devy wide receivers. So I've certainly moved him up a good ways.
Yeah, I like the call. I don't have him quite in my top 30 yet, but he's not that far off, honestly. And I mean, when you're dealing with these smaller scale samples and everything, like, it doesn't take much for them to jump, you know, like to make big jumps when you're talking about Debbie Beth. So you're just looking for certain thresholds for them to surpass, and then once they do that, they skyrocket. So I have them right now at 50, wide receiver 50, but you know, like, it really won't take much for him to jump up. The only thing I'm not loving right now is his ADOT. His ADOT's really low. You know, I don't know if he's slot only or what, or, you know, what we're looking at there, but that's really my only concern. But honestly, you know, for a true freshman, it's not the end of the world. I would like to see it come up. It's not to like the dire levels of like Eugene Wilson, like Trey Wilson or anything like that, but you know, it is lower than I would like to see. You know, and it kind of reminds me of, what's funny is he's directly above Kevin Concepcion in my ranks, and you know, Concepcion's fallen substantially because that was one of the concerns with Concepcion, was the low ADOT. And now after week 1, we're sitting going, okay, I was an idiot. But then the rest of the season, you know, it's like, wait, okay, I guess I was right about that one. That week 1 was just like the weirdest thing. After that, he kind of came down to earth. But, you know, I'm looking at both of them. Malcolm Simmons, 7.1 ADOT. Kevin Concepcion, 7.4. You know, so that's just something that I do look at with receivers. And, you know, that was one of my biggest concerns with Luther Burden in the beginning, was, you know, when people starting to freak out about him, I was like, this isn't a viable, like a Debbie viable player the way that he's being used right now. And now I think we're starting to see that kind of thing. So so much can change, so much can happen. I'm not saying that Malcolm Simmons is bad or anything like that, but we're definitely I would definitely like to see that number come up though.
Yeah, and that's certainly fair. The situation there has very much forced him into that underneath role. That is not somewhere, or that is not the role that I see him long term. Versus Casey Concepcion type of guy. That's a good shout out as a guy who had that lower yards per reception and ADOT and all of that. He is a guy who, we talked about it. He's a good short to intermediate threat, but that's it. But Malcolm Simmons, he can actually win downfield, which is kind of cool to see, going back to his tape in high school, especially, but he's flashed that this year. But you look at Keandre Lambert-Smith and you look at big old Cam Coleman and even a Perry Thompson, and those are big outside receivers. And that has forced Malcolm Simmons, who is small, but I mean, he's 6 foot, he's 180 pounds. So he's got good enough size to him, but that certainly does kind of force him inside a little bit. I think the cool, another neat thing about him was that his yards per reception, I believe, was more around 15 before the last 2 weeks against Missouri and against Kentucky and even Georgia right before that. They've kind of had to utilize him a little bit more underneath and harder to break those big plays consistently with that role. So I am excited to see that role expand next year with when Keandre Lambert-Smith moves on there. I think there's huge opportunity for Malcolm Simmons to be the wide receiver one in that offense, but I also still like Cam Coleman. I mean, he's a great wide receiver as well. So a lot of things to be kind of hopeful for there in Clemson. Cam Coleman deserves a shout out as well. Let's see. I see John is dipping out here. So I will go right into my second guy here. True freshman who really had his big blow up game, Jaden Baugh from Florida. Baugh just had an awesome game, just putting up 5 touchdowns as a true freshman running back. And I see we got John back here. Great.
Wow, I don't know what the heck just happened.
You're good. I was just introducing one more underrated guy, Jaden Baugh, Florida freshman running back for the Gators. Just had a huge blow-up game, 5 touchdowns. And, when you score that many touchdowns, that's going to skew your production. Like you get those 1 yard goal line touchdowns. Yeah, that's going to skew. Like you're not making as big of plays because, you're punching it in those short yardage situations. But he has nothing to sneeze at either as far as that production. I expect to see a lot more of him going forward. I get that part of the reason he was in the game was because of injury to Montrell Johnson, but Montrell is not a long-term guy there. I think Baugh is more of the future at Florida. He is a guy who he can score a ton of points. So from a fantasy standpoint, very friendly. He has that workhorse size. I'm excited to see what's ahead for him. I do believe that he has enough receiving ability going back to high school to be kind of a 3-down guy. He's another example of a back where I wouldn't actually mind if he lost a little bit of weight. He'll become more and more explosive and electric as a weapon if he trims down a slight bit. I mean, he could use a couple extra or a couple less pounds, I guess I would say. But no, Baugh is a promising guy. Again, we don't need to look into it, into the statistics too in depth at this point, only just because we have such a small sample with him. But he shows just a great nose for the end zone, and I think he's going to be a great physical running back with maybe some juice and upside if he can trim down a few pounds there.
Yeah, I that was my concern with Baugh, was that he's coming in at like 240 something pounds, and like I was just like, man, if he's that as a freshman, what's gonna happen? Because we've seen these guys be around the 240 range, and it doesn't seem to work out for too many of them. So that was always my concern. But honestly, he's done a good job with it, and can't really hate on the guy for what he's done. He's taken the role that I thought Trayon Webb was going to have and kind of just run with it, pun intended, I guess. But that being said, he hasn't done too much besides the Kentucky game. He also hasn't had too much opportunity. But I don't know how, because I feel like he got a lot of he got a lot of love like right before the season started. So I don't know how underrated he could be, but I guess it just really depends on your league and how like in tune they are, how much they listen to, Devy analysts, C2C analysts, like that kind of thing. If he's actually considered underrated or not. Cause like I said, I feel like he got pretty hyped up there towards the end of the whole like recruiting cycle off season kind of deal. And so like he was almost like overhyped for a little bit, but now maybe it's kind of coming back around to where he was quiet for a little bit. People kind of forgot about him and that kind of thing. So I don't mind him being mentioned here at all.
Yeah, and he was definitely one of those guys where, like you said, he was just everybody's favorite sleeper there for a few weeks when he had that big, I think it was I believe it was the spring game, and everybody's like, "Ooh, check out this guy," and they were just kind of
Right.
discovering him. Versus when I first was scouting him, before spring games and all that, like I was really, really interested in him. Then he gained all that weight. I mean, he's still only in the 227, 230 range is what I saw most recently. So even if he just gets 220, I think that will really help his burst, because looking back to high school, he was a pretty bursty guy at a much lighter weight. So very interested to see what's ahead for him. And at Florida, you're not going to be the most efficient guy in that offense, or you're
Mm-mm.
not going to be a guy who runs at 7 yards per carry. It's just not really going to happen. But yeah, do you have any more underrated guys for us here, John?
Yeah. I was looking at, so this is a name that I've mentioned multiple times, but I feel like after this past week, it's time to mention him again, and it's Jarquez Hunter. Uh, from the times of the days of Tank Bigsby's of old, we've been talking about Jarquez Hunter possibly taking over, being the better running back and all that. We were never the biggest on Tank Bigsby, and honestly, rightfully so. I know he's getting a little bit of love now, but it's not like he's doing anything amazing. So but then Jarquez Hunter had little off the field issues. The offense in general just kind of had some issues, and not the greatest quarterback play, all that kind of stuff. It kind of just added up to Jarquez Hunter being an underrated player, and rightfully so. He didn't really do too much. He had a decent year last year, but he didn't really put up the numbers that I was hoping that he was going to do. Well, this year he's leading the SEC in rushing. Now, obviously, he just had a huge game, so that's going to help. But he just put up 278 yards and 2 touchdowns against Kentucky. Kentucky is not a joke of a defense. Like, that is a solid defense. I don't know how strong their rush defense is, but I know that basically every team that's gone up against Kentucky has had some kind of issue, or has had issues moving the ball, and yet here we are, almost 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. The receiving profile hasn't really gotten all that much better. Like, I would like to see more out of the receiving. He's barely hitting the thresholds that I would like to see from him, but it's right there around the minimum. But he's easily going to be over 1,000 yards rushing this year. In the SEC, he'll probably be somewhere around 8 to 10 touchdowns or something like that when it's all said and done. I don't think he's going to get the love that he deserves, and he's probably, just the way this class is and everything, he's probably not going to be a third round pick or anything like that. He'll probably be like a fourth or maybe even later. Hopefully not later, but I feel like he can be one of those underrated players that's like, oh man, he got drafted to the right team, and now all of a sudden he's starting, and now all of a sudden we're excited about him. Like, just the same way people are getting excited about a Ray Davis, or somebody like that, a Kamani Vidal. Like, they went to a spot that actually needed them, and they get some use. And I could easily see the same thing happening with Jarquez Hunter. So I rarely hear him mentioned. Maybe he will be mentioned more now that he just had the 278-yard game. But it just, I don't know. It feels like a player that I've always, like, I picked up on like early on, and I've just never let go. But he just seems like he's gonna always be like my underrated guy.
Yeah, right. You've definitely mentioned him in the past, and like you mentioned, last year was just that down year, and everybody kind of soured on him and moved him way down. So at this point, he definitely is underrated. And I guess I'm just looking past that Kentucky game, and he's been starting the whole season before that, but it's been more mixed results. And then, like you said, he goes up for 278 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, that was awesome. And then I look at Jaden Bach, because I was just talking about him right at Florida, and the week before he played Kentucky, and that's his 5-touchdown game. So I'm actually
Oh,
starting to
wow.
think that Kentucky must be just really falling apart as far as their run defense. But again, it's
Yeah.
SEC competition, so I'm not gonna like say, oh, well, it doesn't count or anything like
Well,
that. So
Ball only had 106 yards, though. So he was
oh
at
yeah.
4.8 yards per clip. And so he did put up the touchdowns, but it wasn't like he had this like ridiculous day, beyond the touchdowns.
Yeah, no, for sure. And those long runs, I guess I didn't really see what Jarquez had like a 50-yarder, but like I mean, I'm sure he was ripping off runs all day. It's at that rate. Yeah, you have to give him credit, but Jarquez, we've been down this path before with him where it's just like very promising, but as you said, there's only so much room for these guys to get drafted into really prominent situations and situations where the team actually invested enough in them to want to give him extensive opportunity. So I will be very curious to see where he lands, because he doesn't necessarily need day 2 draft capital to be a relevant guy. Like I could certainly see somewhere in rounds 4 through 7, Jarquez Hunter finding the right spot and certainly getting a role. Because if Tank Bigsby can do that and stand out at the NFL level over a short amount of time, certainly Jarquez should be able to do that as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where I've become better as an analyst or whatever, is understanding that like that's unfortunately just how the NFL views these guys, and that's just like he's going to probably be a 4th or 5th round pick or something like that. Whereas in the past I was like, no, this guy's really good. He's going to be like a 2nd round guy, and it's like, yeah, it's just unfortunately just not how it works out for these running backs. It just doesn't seem to. But like it's also not a death knell. People lost their mind after Bucky Irving went out and ran slow in air quotes at the combine. And then, he got drafted in the 4th round by the Bucks. Well, he's looking pretty damn good on the Bucks right now, and he's being used weekly and everything. I mean, there's people starting Bucky Irving right now. So, the fact that he's a 4th round pick, the fact that he ran slow, like none of that matters, because people are scoring, or he's scoring fantasy points for them on their teams. And I could easily see a Jarquez Hunter doing the exact same thing. But he's not even getting the love that Bucky Irving was getting from last year. So like that's what I'm saying. I feel like he is underrated.
Yep.
All right. You got anybody else for us? Or are we moving on to the state of the wide receivers?
I had some other names, but I guess the one that I feel strongly about, and this isn't necessarily underrated, but from a Devy landscape, this guy just has never got enough talk. I have been on this guy for quite a while, so I kind of have to bring him back up here, just try to give him some more love. And Harold Fannin, tight end out of Bowling Green.
I was just looking at his name and thinking about him.
Yeah. I mean, the guy's just been nothing but excellent. I mean, just a beast, and I get it. It's not the highest level of competition. Bowling Green, um, they're probably not going to stick out to NFL scouts from the school, but from his traits, some of the athleticism there. I mean, you covet that at the tight end position. And I think that his versatility and size and playmaking ability, all of that should be pretty tantalizing for us when we want these these tight ends to hit from a receiving standpoint. Well, they have to be capable of some of these things that Harold Fannin can do. So that is exciting. It's just, how good is he actually going to be when he transfers? He's not going to transfer up, I wouldn't think, level of competition wise. I think he'll just declare for the NFL draft this season, off of the amazing things he's been up to this year. So I'll be curious if he's more like that Brevin Jordan. Everybody wanted him to be really good out of Miami, and he's athletic and all this and that, but just ultimately not a complete enough player, and just kind of lacking some of the nuance and those types of things. Like I'm curious to see if that's the Harold Fannin route, or if he could be one of those guys who truly makes a huge impact at the NFL level. Because what he's doing in college right now is really awesome.
Yeah, and I think, people get caught up in the sexy, RAS score guys and all that kind of stuff for the tight ends, but I honestly think that it's the actual productive tight ends that are making it in the NFL. and how many Luke Musgraves and Zach Kuntz and like all those guys, have we seen, and they do absolutely nothing in the NFL. But then you have your Tucker Crafts and your Trey McBrides and players like that just worked their ass off in college and earned a role, and they get drafted because of it. Maybe they don't get the high end draft capital that you would have loved to have seen, but eventually they make it on the NFL team and start making a difference for you. And I could easily see Harold Fannin doing that. Maybe it won't be a year one thing, but it could easily be. He's the kind of guy that you end up taking in like the third, fourth round of your rookie draft, and whether you put him on a taxi squad or whatever, all of a sudden you have found gold within like a year or two. And sometimes it can be year one, but I think you have to be a little realistic and say it definitely could be a year or two before he's viable or valuable for your team.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you brought up some good names there. I think, like Dallas Goddard, and that's not a direct comp by any means, play style wise, but Tucker Kraft and who's the other guy you mentioned? G5
Trey McBride.
tight end. Yeah, Trey
Trey
McBride.
McBride,
Like,
yeah.
those are good examples. Absolutely. These guys from smaller schools, they can make it if they have the traits and, like you said, a lot of that production coming along with it to give them the attention they need. And Harold Fannin Jr., he has 947 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, and he's been very efficient. He's been just as good and, well, actually a lot better than he was last season, just because he's drawing more and more volume, and he's still producing in an efficient manner. And he's even, contributing in the rushing game. Like, they want to get this guy the ball. So I'm not saying, that's not Brock Bowers-ish, but in a way, I mean, they want to get him the ball consistently. They're making that a huge priority because they know how talented Harold Fannin Jr. is. So, yeah, I'm glad that we could at least touch on him a little bit.
All right, I got one more, and I feel like I talked about him a little bit during the offseason. I feel like I haven't really talked too much about him since then, but I feel like he's just not on people's actual like Devy radars at all, and I really don't get it. Once again, it's another running back, so when it's all said and done, probably another 4th or 5th round pick or something like that. It's unfortunately, like I said, it's just tough for these underrated guys to be much more than that. But who knows? Crazier things have happened. But I actually have him ranked ahead of Jarquez Hunter. So I mean, it's Basil Tootin, out of Virginia Tech, and I just don't think he gets the love that he deserves. I know he transferred up from smaller school program and everything, so of course you're going to discount anything he did in the past. But what he did last year looked pretty good. It was like, hey, this guy could be something. Well, he's obliterating those numbers this year. He's already surpassed last year's numbers in 8 games this year, where he had 13 games last year. He has almost 1,000 yards, 951. He has 12 touchdowns, 18 receptions, only 56 yards. That the receiving game is not quite there. Although he had 27 receptions for 239 yards last year. So I don't know what happened this year, what's going on. It's not really seeming to work out as far as like the actual receiving, but I think he already kind of proved that he can do it last year, which is good. But he's had some solid opponents. Going up against Miami, he had 19 rushes for 141 yards and a touchdown. Going up against Rutgers, 15 for 122. Stanford, not as much, 21 for 73. Boston College, 18 rushes, 266 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Like, just completely dominated that game. There's not too many games where he's not a factor, and he's not, going out there and putting up fantasy points for your C2C teams. But I want him to be on Devy radars, because I honestly think that he could be in the mix in this Devy class. Although, we know how many running backs are in this class. So like there's so many, they're going to get lost in the shuffle and everything. I think it's going to be it's going to be a very important class where you actually focus on the best players, like especially for the running back position, because there's going to be so many names. And I think Basil Tootin should be one of them that's, considered in that, like, 3rd round range, something like that in rookie drafts, where you start going, hey, I want to get this guy. I want to prioritize this guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, Tootin is a good guy to bring up in that, he's again in that later round type of category, but still, I mean, that's just a very good guy to keep your eye on, because you don't know. These guys land in the right opportunity. They're are opportunities out there. The NFL needs more quality backs, and he seems like he's very quality. That's for sure. He's been doing well for the fantasy teams out there in CFF and C2C leagues this season, which has been a huge plus. And that's on a Virginia Tech team, which you don't really think of them as having year after year like the best running back production and this and that. But Tuden's been kind of taking it to that next level. Let's just hope that injury that happened this week, this last weekend, isn't serious. He was, left in a walking boot, but I mean, at least
I did see that. I'm hoping it's nothing crazy, but I mean, honestly, I think he's done enough that even if he missed the rest of the season or anything, I don't think it would be, like teams can't be like, oh, well, we don't know who he is. Like I think he's done enough already. He's put enough on tape that it really wouldn't be a problem. But one thing, and I mean, honestly, I don't know if it truly matters or not, but one thing I love to see is when a running back just dominates his team. And Basil Tuden dominates his team. The next best running back, because the next best rusher on the team is Kyron Drones, the quarterback. The next best running back, now remember, Basil Tuden has 951 rushing yards this season. The next best running back has 87 rushing yards. There's no one else. It's Basil Tuden. Now, obviously, if he misses time, that's going to change a little bit. But so far this season, they don't say, "Oh, let's mix this guy and let's mix." They know who their stud is and they play him.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I won't extend this segment more than this this last guy that I at least want to briefly mention. We don't even have to go into depth because he's at this point he is not necessarily underrated, but I still think he's not rated where he should be amongst more of the consensus. And that's Caleb Johnson, running back out of Iowa. And this hurts me just because I've told this story before, but he was on the roster bubble for me this offseason and in a C2C league. And I reached out to everybody in the league. I'm like, who wants Caleb Johnson? Put him on the block. Nobody, crickets. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll cut him. And now he's one of the best running backs in college football. And that's off of a terrible last season, right? Didn't really give us a lot to be hopeful for. And it's Iowa. But Caleb Johnson has been so efficient as a rusher this season. He has 1,144 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns in the Big Ten against quality defenses. He's been still excellent. He's not a great receiving back. That's just not necessarily his game. But at the same time, I think he's capable of at least catching some dump off passes there. And he has the size. He has some of that burst that you want to see. He is, I don't know, what, top 10 back in college football right now, John? Or what do you think? Higher than that? Top 5? I think I have him at 5, though there's a few other guys I would maybe interchange with him pretty easily. But I mean, how high is he for you?
Easily top 10. I have him at 7. And honestly, he's right there. I mean, he's almost tied with like 5th. So I mean, it's really, it's kind of nitpicking at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So just have to throw him out there. We'll do a more in-depth analysis of the running back position here in an upcoming show. But I know we have some wide receivers to get to tonight as well.
Absolutely. I think it was a good call out, though, because, I mean, he's obviously getting on people's radars now, so he's not necessarily underrated to that point, but I think he is still technically underrated because of last season. I mean, and like you said, you dropped him. It was a night and day. It's night and day from last year to this year. Like, it's just like almost to the point where you can't explain it, and like how it could be that different beyond like injury and stuff, but I don't even know that there was. So it's just really weird. So I think he is a little underrated still. You don't hear him mentioned in like mock drafts and things like that just yet, or at least not nearly as high as he should be. So I think he is still a little underrated. By the time it's all said and done, he'll probably move up there and catch up, I would assume, but maybe not. We'll have to wait and see. But I think that is enough of the underrated players. I think it's time to talk about the state of the wide receivers. And I will say, like I said before, it's a little gross. It's a lot of gross even. I really thought that that we were just gonna get this rush of new players, and we would just now it's this guy and this guy and that guy and this guy, and it just doesn't seem to have happened. It's a lot of the same names, like the names that we're going to be talking about today, and even going into rookie drafts and all that, are a lot of the same names that we've been talking about for the past 2 or 3 years. Some of them kind of had a little roller coaster, and like a Ja'Cory Brooks, is a player that like was completely off our radars after he left Alabama, had to transfer out. But like we were both very high on Ja'Cory Brooks at one point, and then he just something he pissed off some coach somewhere at Alabama, and they said, okay, you're done. Like, you're just not going to play for us anymore. And so we took that as he's not as good as we thought he was. Well, Louisville decided that he is as good as we thought he was, and he's gone out and just absolutely dominated this year. He's right back to where like we basically had him ranked before, but it's like names like that have kind of caught back up and came back up. It's not really necessarily like the new names like that I was kind of assuming it was going to be. And so when it's all said and done, my ranks have changed a little bit as far as like the 2025 class and things like that. But I mean, for the most part, it's the same names. It's just like kind of like come back and forth. And I guess I don't know if it's the same thing for you, if you're noticing the same if you're having the same experience with that. There's a couple names like, I never really thought Ty Felton was going to be a thing. Like there's a couple names that we can throw out there, obviously, but for the most part, it's like, hey, we knew that Tet McMillan was a stud. Guess what? Tet McMillan's a stud.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are mainly names that we kind of liked coming into the season. There's certainly a drop off after those top couple guys, and just more ambiguity, uncertainty, and I'm intrigued by how the rest of the season is going to play out. Because are we going to have clarity at the top, or are we just going to have like Tet and maybe a Mecca, and then a drop off of just different guys who are maybe more uncertain? So I'd like to get into some of those guys, but do you agree with those two guys I listed as the top couple guys in this class, like Tet and Emeka Egbuka? Tet McMillan out of Arizona and Mecca out of Ohio State. Those are the two top guys that I have right now in this class. And I will say that Tet is definitely ahead of Mecca at this point. There's no doubt about it. But I still like both of them. And I think both of them are pretty safe projections, which is something we can't necessarily say with that next group of wide receivers.
Yeah, I have Tet by himself, and I was going to ask you, do you have Tet by himself, or do you have a more of a tier 2, tier 3, something like that? But I mean, I have Tet all by himself. Honestly, like Tet is the closest thing that we have in the 2025 class to Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, like that level of player. And in Devy Beth, they're 1, 2, 3, like they're that close. Like they're all in the same tier. There's no one else in Devy Beth that even comes remotely close to that. And that's even me saying that as an Emeka Egbuka fan who always rooted for him and always wanted him to be in that top tier. I don't have him in that top tier, but that's the elite tier. And so like it's not saying that Egbuka is bad, it's just saying that he's not necessarily Marvin Harrison Jr., he's not necessarily Malik Neighbors, like he's maybe a step below that. I am saying I believe that Tet McMillan, even though they're all different players, they win in different ways. I'm saying that Tet McMillan is that level of player and is the only one that I believe deserves to be considered the like must have kind of wide receiver in this 2025 class.
Yeah, no, definitely a must-have type of prospect, and there's definitely a bit of a difference. I'll say more than a bit of a difference between those two guys. Definitely have to pay up more so to get Tet, and he's worth it. So if you could do that, that's great. But Emeka is a nice consolation prize there for sure, just as a safe projection. And I think he could be even more exciting than what we've seen at Ohio State, to be honest. He's just been pegged into that underneath role, and he hasn't had the most exciting quarterback play there over the last 2 seasons, last season or this season. And I think that in a lot of cases, a guy like that might be slightly slept on because of all the other talent that's been there for quite a while. Marvin Harrison Jr., and now we're having, such a talented wide receiver there in Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State that it just takes away some of that shine, understandably, from Emeka. I mean, if Emeka was truly at that same level as Tet, he'd be probably putting up even more insane numbers there at Ohio State, but he's not. So, so those are the top two guys. After that, I mean, I have a fairly big drop off in this 2025 class. So there's a group of guys here. I like all of them. I think all of them could be nice impact players at the next level, but there's uncertainty. There's some guys out of that group that are very likely going to bust and or just be letdowns compared to their maybe Devy values or preconceived notions coming into this season. How do you want to do this, John? Should we start naming off guys? Should I throw out a bunch of guys? What do you think there?
I was kind of thinking, yeah, like throw out a bunch, like just throw out tiers and stick to the tiers here, or as much as we can, because obviously we could have different tiers, we could have different ranks and everything. I was going to mention Trey Harris is probably a player that doesn't get enough love, but honestly, I have him like almost. He's barely behind Emeka Egbuka, and he's in that tier 2 with Egbuka for me. He is starting to get a little bit of love from like NFL Mock Draft Database.com. Like they're starting to show him in like the late first round and stuff in a lot of mock drafts in October. It's definitely creeping up. It actually it crept up quite a bit towards the beginning of the month. Later in the month now, he's been hurt, so maybe like it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. He's kind of fallen off like more as a second round pick, but if he comes back and starts doing what he was doing, a few weeks ago, he could easily be back in the first round mix. He is a 5th-year player, and so of course that's going to always be on people's minds. But like the way that he's winning, the things that he's doing is special, is exciting, and so I definitely have him as like probably the last player that like I truly feel is different. Like beyond this, there's players that I like and that I'm like, oh, I would like to get that guy on my team, but I feel like it's those 3 wide receivers, Tet, Egbuka, and Trey Harris, that I'm like, I want those guys on my team, like no matter what. If I can find a way to draft them, trade for them, do whatever, I want those 3.
Yeah. And me, I absolutely like Trey Harris. In fact, in our hot take episode that we did earlier this or it was beginning of the season, that was one of my hot takes, which obviously, I'm doing this podcast with you. You are also a very much a Trey Harris truther. So this was not going to register very high on that hot scale, right? Mild, hot, fire, Diablo. But Trey Harris, I said would be in contention and a finalist for the Blitnikoff best college wide receiver for this season. And we've seen that. And unfortunately, he just got banged up. That's kind of what happened to Trey Harris last season. It slowed him down a bit. And then now we're seeing him miss a few games and kind of an uncertain status ahead. Plus, they're really hitting that tough competition in the SEC. Trey Harris has looked good. Jackson Dart has dropped a little bit as far as his just production overall. I think some of that goes hand in hand, right? You lose your best wide receiver, your reliable guy. As a quarterback, your stats take a little bit of a hit, plus the level of competition. But Trey Harris he's been balling kind of no matter what. So it's not really that I have concern there. I see him as a guy who I don't quite have that level of safety and confidence in that projection to the NFL level as I do with Emeka Egbuka. I believe it was me, you, Dirty Mike. We were talking about some wide receiver prospects, and I threw out the idea of like a Jahan Dotson. That it's one path that I see for Trey Harris. I'm not saying that's where like how he'll end up. I'm just saying that there's some similarities between them as a player, and I have a certain amount of doubts there that I don't necessarily have with Emeka Egbuka. So I do have a tier between the guys, but I really want Trey Harris still in drafts. I mean, I want to take a shot on that guy, and assuming health here, I still think he has a solid shot at maybe making claim to being one of, if not the best college wide receivers production wise this season. But yeah, we'll see. Missing a couple games is really tough. I mean, same thing if Ashton Gianti at Boise State missed a bunch of games.
Yeah.
Like he's going to drop down, even though he's a stud, right? We all recognize that. He starts dropping down, out of sight, out of mind. Other guys outproduce, cumulatively and get more recognition. So Trey Harris here, let's not forget about him, even if something happens to his season to kind of derail the next few weeks. He is a very, very talented wide receiver still in this class.
All right, so I want to frame this as I'm asking you, because we know how I feel about this player. So I'm asking you, what are we doing with Luther Burden? Because, a lot of people are still comping him in this range, saying he's there's still people saying that he should be in tier 1 with Tet McMillan, and that he's like a 101 to 105 range of rookie drafts and things, and I can't say I agree with that. So but I'm asking you, when do we start talking about Luther Burden? Because I get there's people are making arguments that like he's not used properly, and there's more to him than what you're seeing on the field and things like that. He's obviously going to go probably blaze at the combine. That's going to get people excited. He's probably going to get really good draft capital because of it. So he's going to have good things on his side. But man, it's been even worse of a season than I would have expected, as probably his biggest hater.
Right. Yeah. No. And it's somebody who has always been hopeful for him, but also demanding of him to take that next step. He has just not done that this season, and you could say, partially due to health. He's been in and out of 1 or 2 games, and partially the health of his quarterback. Now Brady Cook has been out, so you see some of his worst production the last few weeks. Well, that coincides with both solid competition, yes, but more importantly, his quarterback is just not out there to sling him the ball. So yes, you have to take that into context for that production, but at the end of the day, before that, it's not like he was dominating down the field. It's not like he was expanding that route tree to the extent that we needed. And Luther Burden has not necessarily separated himself on the team as that alpha type of guy. He has all the size, the speed, that type of thing to be an impact player. And I really hope that we can see him maybe deployed more as like a Deebo Samuel type of guy at the next level. It's just that it takes the right coach in the right situation to really get that out of him. And I don't even know if at this point Luther Burden can be that consistent because he hasn't really been consistent at the college level. You expect him to be a consistent pro. That's still a jump up that he has yet to take. So I guess I wouldn't be completely surprised to see him go in this NFL draft. There's always a chance though that he stays just because the season, like you said, has not gone very well. But as of right now, yes, he's part of this class, this 2025 class. I still actually have him in this range. Now I have a tier list of guys, but I mean, do I feel confident about Luther Burden at this point in time? No. It says a little bit more about the class, how this class is, kind of dropping off a little bit at the wide receiver position. There's still solid guys that I consider in this range who are trending upward, or at least, treading water, versus Luther Burden is kind of dipping down, right? He continues to fall. And how much further is it going to fall? Like, I'll continue to adjust if he continues to play this poorly. Like, there's no doubt about it. You have to adjust with these things. And like you said, folks out there are slow to adjust, especially when it's a big stud like that. We have Luther Burden here. We also have a guy like Evan Stewart. Now, he at least is showing some signs of life, which is great after transferring from Texas A&M after little success last year to Oregon. He's finally showing, okay, he can have those big flash games. He's flashing that potential that got us all excited. Evan Stewart is still kind of this next tier, maybe a little bit lower down, but still a guy who's very intriguing if he decides to be a part of this class, which is up in the air. Because, I mean, he's being outproduced by Tez Johnson on his own team, too. So there's certainly some concerns there for Evan Stewart. Do you still have him high? Or is he dropping a lot for you?
I mean, honestly, I was always lower on Stewart, and I generally don't do manual adjustments in Devy Beth. I try my best just to stick to her grades and just say, like, this is how I feel about a player, because that's, it's just a pretty proven process. But with Evan Stewart, there was just too many people that were saying he's my wide receiver 1, and I'm looking at my grade and I'm like, that's not even close. So I did make a manual adjustment for Evan Stewart, and I said, all right, I'm going to give him a little bit of credit. Maybe he was hurt. Maybe, I don't know, he just didn't like the coach, didn't like the team. I have no idea. So I gave him a little bit of credit, and I pushed him up into my top 5 by doing that manual adjustment. Well, he's fallen from there, of course, but he's still right there in that mix, like right around a Luther Burden, somebody like that. I actually have him, and this might be a surprise for you, and we'll see how you feel about it. We talked about Ja'Cory Brooks. I actually have him tied with Ja'Cory Brooks in Devy Beth. And so, like, I kind of feel, they both have question marks. They both have, flaws, but, there's also some excitement with both players. And you just said, Evan Stewart had like a couple of good games recently. It's like, okay, maybe he's back. Maybe he just needed to like figure out the offense, whatever. Oh, wait, he went 1 for 19 this week against Illinois. And they won 38-9. So like, I don't know if he played the entire game. I have no idea. Like I obviously we could check it out and find out, but, he caught one ball for 19 yards in a game that they won 38-9. Like that's not great. And in fact, I think I lost the page. I was gonna say, I think that Dylan Gabriel threw for almost 300 yards in that game. So, just the fact that he, really didn't do hardly anything. Tez Johnson that you mentioned earlier had over 102 yards, or had 102 yards. And then a couple other guys, Patrick Herbert, Justice Lowe, like these guys have, more receptions, more yardage than Evan Stewart. I'm kind of hoping that maybe he missed time. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually don't have the answer there. I didn't watch this game, and like you said, Oregon was definitely running away with it. So, Tez really outproducing Evan Stewart here definitely warrants some concern, and understandably so. But then you see Evan Stewart just lighten up Ohio State earlier this season and looking great against them, and that's one of the top defenses in all of college football. So makes you question if there was something going on, whether he tried to play a full complement of snaps or not against Illinois. Something to look into, because like we want to apply all the context that we can into the production and say, well, yeah, that maybe that's a reason for a slight manual bump up or down. But yeah, that's a question mark got to look into with Evan Stewart. But there's no doubt that the talent is there, and I think he can be a more complete wide receiver than Ja'Cory Brooks. But I mean, Ja'Cory's trajectory it's awesome, and he's kind of back. Right, he was a very talented guy at Alabama. I kind of like that Ja'Cory's creeping up closer and closer to an Evan Stewart, even if I don't have him quite there yet. I'm on track with that trajectory. If Ja'Cory Brooks keeps doing what he's doing and Evan Stewart keeps doing what he's also doing, that's going to meet right at the end of the season, where I think that that's going to be very accurate. So I guess another guy that I want to mention here is
real quick. Evan Stewart.
Of course.
Evan Stewart played 45 snaps against Illinois, so he played probably a full game's worth of snaps and had one reception for 19 yards. So I think the concerns are warranted. There's also the excitement's warranted. Like, he is not a perfect prospect by any means, but you definitely see flashes. I feel like when it's all said and done, he's probably going to be a little overrated and a player that I'm not going to end up with much of.
Right. No, exactly. He could be a little bit boomer bust, but hopefully he puts together in maybe another solid season. I would love to see him come back, as Tez Johnson's probably off to the NFL, and then Evan Stewart could have that offense to himself another year there. But another guy that I should mention here, who's been a little bit more quiet of late because of injury, but Isaiah Bond, Texas wide receiver, definitely was trending in the right direction, and a guy I really liked coming into the season, and the early season results were pretty solid there. We haven't really seen Texas look amazing yet. Like, I mean, there's been flashes, right? Arch Manning especially has flashed. Quinn Ewers has flashed. They just have not put it together, right? They haven't put all the pieces in. Yeah, just the offense is running at maybe like partial capacity, not full capacity at this time, with some issues in the running game and the passing game. So Isaiah Bond also being injured lately is a bummer for his production. It's going to hurt any sort of analytical analysis of him. But I've seen enough this season to be really, really intrigued by everything that he's doing as a route runner, as an athlete, catching the football. He's showing more nuance than he did at Alabama, and that's what I really wanted to see. I just hope that he can get back to where he needs to be. I mean, to be a top end guy in his class, because he needs to be healthy down the stretch and being a difference maker for a playoff team like Texas, because this 2025 class, it has a lot of room for guys to rise here in the last part of the season. If they can just continue to finish strong, we need that bounce back out of Isaiah Bond.
I could very well be wrong, but I really feel like he's going to come back. And, unfortunately, I feel like we're going to say that about a lot of these guys that aren't like fifth year guys. It's just like, I feel like he could come back and play, especially with NIL and everything. Texas is, trying to go out and win a championship. I don't think they can win a championship unless they put Arch in there. But like they're definitely going to be in the mix. They're going to be in the playoffs and all that, unless they just completely fall flat on their face. Like you said, him missing time right now is definitely not helping anything. He has had some really nice games, but he has not put it all together, by any means. And I just don't think I don't think he quite has enough. Honestly, he really does remind me of A.D. Mitchell. Not necessarily like comping the players, but just like everything about it, the transferring over to Texas and then, like just not really great, but not really bad, just like a solid player. And then, we see what AD Mitchell's doing in the NFL. Now, maybe not it's all of his fault because he doesn't really have a quarterback in the NFL, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like he should come back for another year. But, if he starts hearing something different from, the NFL, that he's going to be a higher end pick and everything, I know a lot of people are really excited about Isaiah Bond. So I get it. Probably another player that I would just let somebody else take, just because I feel like he hasn't done enough to like truly show us like he's the guy on Texas. Like there's really been so many other players that we can say, we can't really say who's the number one right now on Texas. I don't think we can say, oh, it's definitely Isaiah Bond. We can say he's in the mix for that job, but I don't know that we can guarantee, oh yeah, it's Isaiah Bond. He's the number one no matter what.
I guess I would argue that before the last 2 weeks, we could say that Isaiah Bond was the most consistent and productive of the wide receivers and the most explosive, really, out of guys who have a decent sample. But I mean, yeah, with the injury, that's going to knock him down, and I can understand some of the concern there. But the last 2 weeks, that injury has obviously bothered him and significantly limited his effectiveness on the snaps he's played, and he just hasn't played as many snaps either. So against Oklahoma, against Georgia, unfortunately, just haven't been able to see him showcase that. So that goes to your point of him potentially returning, but there's still a lot of season left, and college football playoffs, I mean, that's going to be huge. So we can see his stock soar. You threw out a comp there. I say like a Jalen Waddle could be actually a comp. I'm not saying that they're exactly the same play style and this and that, but I do think that they have that explosive element to their game. Might have to be in the right system and situation in that, but there's certainly a bright future there. I am a lot higher on Isaiah Bond than I was on a guy like a AD Mitchell, for example, for sure.
That's fair. I mean, he only has 380 yards on the season. And obviously, he's missed some time. He's been unhealthy and everything. But I mean, Gunnar Helm, the tight end, has more yards and touchdowns on the season. It's just I like to see guys that just take over and dominate, and he's just not that. So or at least he hasn't been to this point. So I'm not hating on the guy by any means. I would like to see more before I can sit here and talk about him as possibly being in that mix. Now, like I said, I've heard a lot of mock drafts and things where he's in he's a first round pick in the NFL draft and everything. That's obviously going to push him up a little bit. But that's why I say I feel like with those kind of players, they end up just getting pushed up higher than I'm willing to draft them, and then somebody else is always going to take them. So I just kind of like, not to say I never write a player off, but I kind of just go, somebody else is going to take them. I'm not going to end up with them.
Yeah, right. And that's where the Waddle comp can come in, as far as a guy who's never really dominated in an offense.
Yeah.
And he's been efficient and explosive in spurts, but not necessarily a number one in an offense. So certainly some parallels there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at it right now, and he has a 21% market share in his best season. And that's fine, but it's not stud wide receiver that I'm looking for, just taking over the game and he can't be stopped. Like that's what I'm looking for with these wide receivers, or else I'm willing to look at other positions and say, hey, especially this year, this 2025 class, we know it's not the greatest QB class, but what does that mean? It means in the second round, we're going to have some QBs that are interesting that we might want to draft, where normally we might be talking about, 5 QBs in the first round or whatever. Well, this year it might be 5 QBs in the second round of rookie drafts. And then, and that's where I'm willing to go, okay, well, do I want Isaiah Bond or do I want Jackson Dart? And maybe I want Jackson Dart there, and I get a solid NFL QB for my dynasty roster, rather than going with a wide receiver that could possibly be a thing at some point. You know, like you said, like even like a Jalen Waddle is probably like a high end comp. I don't know. Does he have the athleticism that Waddle has? I mean, I know Waddle's pretty damn athletic.
Yeah, no, he has very good athleticism for sure. That was kind of his calling card coming out. And one of those things that Texas hasn't really just been able to connect with him on some deep balls. And that was an issue with Xavier Worthy
Well,
and
yeah,
AD
that's a Quinn
Mitchell.
Ewers issue. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold that against Isaiah Bond. That's a Quinn Ewers issue.
No, definitely not. And then you look at Bama, it's like Bama, they've had some accuracy issues with the quarterbacks of recent years, looking last year at like Jalen Milroe and that. And, Milroe has turned out to be a pretty solid player for sure, but it's not because he's an accurate quarterback. There's just all sorts of other things that he adds that makes him a pretty interesting prospect and player. But yeah, I mean, Isaiah Bond is one of those guys where you're going to poke some holes in the production profile. That is for sure. And it's understandable, right? Do you want to tolerate that risk and project him to make that next leap? Because certainly guys can when they've been efficient like he has, and when he has some of the natural abilities. It's just, yeah, do you trust him to put it all together?
Yeah.
I will say that a guy 3 years in doing some of the solid stuff, if he stayed another year, I mean, he could certainly put up a season more similar to a Trey Harris or somebody like that, where he continues to dominate, right? Get better and better. Yeah. So there's something to be said about these guys sometimes declaring early, and we haven't necessarily even seen the best of them compared to if they would have stayed longer and longer in college. So I would be curious to see what happens there. There's so much talent at Texas. One of those guys needs to leave. I mean, it's so stocked there.
Well, I just wonder if they get in his ear and they say, yeah, this year's not working out spectacularly. You've missed some time, blah, blah, blah. But you have a stud in Arch Manning coming next year. Like, let's get a season with Arch, and so you can actually put up. And now all of a sudden you're not even considered a late round, late first round or whatever. Now you're considered a top 15 pick, a top 10 pick, like that kind of thing. And I wonder if they get in his ear and they do that. And that's what I'm saying. I think maybe it's 50-50, but like I could really see it either way, where he comes out this year or he just stays another year. I would lean, just by looking at his numbers and everything, I would lean that he should stay, but obviously I have nothing to do with that. But I think that is enough on Isaiah Bond, although a really interesting player. Like I think, like I said, there's so many different ways that could go. Man, like it falls off quick. And then that was the reason why we're doing the state of the wide receivers here. Because I mean, there's definitely some players that are in the mix here, but have not. Most of these players have not had spectacular seasons. There's so many question marks that we can throw out there and do everything. Obviously, we have to talk about Alec A. Minor. Like he's been one of my top guys. He was in my top 5 during the offseason. He's fallen off a little bit, but I really don't think it has anything to actually do with him. It's just that offense is so broken that he's really not even able to do anything, even though he has like almost a 40% market share on that offense, but the offense is so bad that it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that offense has been tough to watch, and so I don't hold it completely against him. But there's no doubt he's not a riser or anything like that. He's not transcending that offense and not necessarily making the big plays that you'd expect, but it's not all on him, right? We have to use that context and say that, well, he's not a 11 yards per reception type of guy in a solid, like mediocre offense, but he also is not somebody who's quite able to, still be a stud regardless of some limitations there in that quarterback room and all that. So definitely still a solid guy there. I think a guy who definitely has to be in this range. And I know he's even risen for you of late, but Travis Hunter, the issue with him, hey, we're going to beat this dead horse, is if he's a wide receiver or a cornerback. But if we're just talking about, what does this wide receiver class look like? I think at this point we have to consider it's a very real possibility he could be a wide receiver at the next level. He's doing some things that are just spectacular. He's been doing them all season, but this last week showcasing some really, really great route running and release abilities. His hands have been spectacular all season long. And despite missing a little bit of time recently, basically the last week and a half, before this week, missing time with injury. He's still been very much involved with the offense, and a guy who's running out there just on fumes. He's still putting up great numbers. So at the end of the day, I guess it depends how you put great numbers, right? Because from an efficiency standpoint, he has not been necessarily as explosive throughout the whole season. But then the way that they're utilizing him is, let's not try to run this guy 9 routes all game long, because he has to play all the snaps on defense too. It's a different role for a different player, but he's flashing that big playability this last week. I think that's why Travis Hunter, for example, was a riser for you from our conversations this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about Cincinnati. Obviously I know G5 program and everything. Are they Big 12 now? Okay, they're Big 12 now. Okay, so I mean, the Big 12, let's just say the Big 12 is essentially what the Pac-12 was before, as far as like defenses and talent levels and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not giving the Big 12 much credit. And I do hold that against them. And I'm looking at the game log, and last week against Cincinnati, 9 for 153, 2 touchdowns, looks great. 17 yards of reception, looks great. The week prior, 2 for 17, 8.5. Oh, well, he was hurt. Oh, okay. The week prior, 3 for 26, 8.7. It's like he's always hurt whenever he has these bad games. Oh, well, he was hurt. Well, how do we judge him unless we, if he's always hurt when he has a bad game, then how do we ever judge him? But it's UCF. He has 9 for 89, 9.9 yards per reception. Like, it's little dinks and dunks. So, like, yeah, we can say that maybe he turned a corner here against Cincinnati and things are looking better because he actually was running real routes and like catching balls down the field and things like that. So like that's great. But a lot of the games are, the 3 games before that were 9.9 yards per reception, 8.7 yards per reception, 8.5 yards per reception. That's more of the dinks and dunks and not running routes, not looking like an NFL wide receiver. So he did move up this week because of that great game against Cincinnati. And I have him. I have him 1 spot ahead of Amanor now. So like he's definitely moved up there for me. He hits a lot of the things that I'm looking for, like market share and stuff like that. But man, I don't know if he's polished enough yet for me to get like truly excited about him. I feel like it's still a little gimmicky, and somebody's going to draft him because like they're going to say, "Oh my God, I've watched him in Colorado. He's the greatest thing ever," and this and that. And I'm just like, you go ahead and do that, dude.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, he could be way overdrafted based on hype, but I mean, if he's there in the same category as Alec Amanor, you still sounded pretty excited about him. So, from a prospect evaluation standpoint, I get it. Like you're trying to rein everybody back in from the excitement there, but let's not also dismiss that as this guy is trash. Like if he's around Alec Amanor, a top 5 to 10 type of guy in the class, that's still pretty solid. And Travis Hunter, again,
Yeah,
if you take in,
definitely.
yeah, if you take into context everything that went on those 2 weeks, like you mentioned the Kansas State and Arizona games. I mean, he hardly played because of injury down the stretch in Kansas State. He was knocked out, and then he came back for that next week, and they like basically pulled him out early too. They're like, we're not going to play you very much. You could see that he was limited. So I get what you're saying. Like you start pulling samples, but hey, if I'm going to say that, Trey Harris, we can't really put too much stock into that stretch where he was banged up, got to be able to do that with other players too. So Travis, if he commits to the wide receiver position, he is an awesome talent. He's a top 5 guy for me in this class just because of the upside there. And I get it. Upside is not everything. Sometimes you want safer prospects that profile a little bit more traditionally, but this class just doesn't have that. We've been talking about the top guys there with Tet and Emeka, and you could throw Trey Harris in there as a little bit more of a pretty profile. But after that, I mean, there's 2 more guys that have to slot into that top 5. Travis Hunter, out of those next guys, has the highest upside by far. Very tantalizing guy as an athlete, that's for sure.
They have some matchups coming up here in the future with like Utah and Kansas, Oklahoma State. Like I really want to see how he does against those teams. I'm not even saying those teams are like studs, like they're like the best teams or whatever, but it's a little more of, like what we of the kind of competition that I would like to see him play against and do well against. And if he does, I really might change my tune. I can't have him in my top 5 just yet, but he definitely could. He definitely could, be there by the end of the year if he can show that he has, made some progression. Because the way that I've always seen him, especially the way he's been used this year, was more of Luther Burden-esque, like dinks and ducks and dunks and not a polished wide receiver. And you're never ever gonna find me looking for the Luther Burden kind of player. That I want I want Amari Cooper. Like I want Garrett Wilson. I want the guy that's gonna go beat a corner and score and gain yardage and touchdowns and things that way. Not, oh, the coach has to find a way to get the ball into his hands and that. Like I never want that, because now you have to find the right coach, you have to find the right scheme and all that. I want the guy that can do it on any possible team, and they just go out and dominate. And I'm not sure. I'm not on board that Travis Hunter is that guy just yet.
Yeah, I get it. He does have to continue to show up, but that'll be an interesting Heisman race as well down the stretch here between him and Janty. And
yeah,
I don't
and
know
I think
who
that's a
else
completely
maybe more.
different. That's a completely different like argument, because I mean the value that he has for that team, and possibly even an NFL team. There's people talking about him being the first overall pick in the NFL draft, and it's like, well, yeah, I mean he's essentially 2 players in one. That's really valuable. But there's a difference. Like I can see the NFL value for him, but it's, this is fantasy football we're talking about, and the fantasy value I don't think quite meets the NFL value.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. But fast forwarding ahead to, what's the draft capital going to look like for Alec Amanor? He could be a 3rd-round guy, based on the
Yeah,
season here, fair or not. With first-round draft capital probably anticipated for Travis Hunter, that's going to boost him
yeah,
up in a model. It's going to
that's
boost him up just in ranks and expectations and opportunity in general too. So I do want
that's
to kind
fair.
of project that ahead. Yeah, for sure.
No, that's definitely fair. I agree. All right. Well, I think we should probably throw out a list of honorable mentions for the 2025 class, and then maybe start getting into the 2026 2027 guys, because we definitely want to show that it gets gross quickly. I mean, it might be quick because we don't have that many guys that actually matter, unfortunately.
Right, yes. But as far as some 25 guys, and then you can supplement with any other additional guys you want to list off. But I have Tez Johnson, Oregon, Ty Felton, Maryland, got Deion Burks, Oklahoma, Malachi Fields, Virginia, Jaden Higgins, Iowa State, Ja'Cory Brooks, Louisville, Antonio Williams, Clemson. And you could probably throw in some other honorable mentions like a Jeremy Bernard, Alabama, Denzel Boston, Washington, Aaron Anderson, LSU. I mean, you can go down the list, and I'm not, in love with those last guys I listed, but they're just some more names that kind of catch the eye. Yeah, I mean, I know a couple of those guys you really like. They could certainly be risers, just depending on landing spot, draft capital, etc. Because they all have interesting aspects to their profile, one way or another. A couple there don't necessarily scream like they belong, like Deion Burks. He's really fallen down. He's disappointed this season. I really hope he returns or transfers out, because that Oklahoma system right now is kind of a mess, and he's been injured. But other than him, I think like Ja'Cory in that list, or Tez Johnson. And those guys have been pretty productive this season. Malachi Fields, Jaden Higgins, they very interesting guys out of that wide receiver group in 2025 amongst the depth players.
Yeah, I like it. The only one that I'm gonna even push back on at all, because I like the list beyond, is Tez Johnson. I know that he's getting hype. I want absolutely nothing to do with them. We were talking before how I don't like the dink and dunk guys, and his ADOT is a 6.4. I mean, it's literally like right around the line of scrimmage. Just like the epitome of dinks and dunks. And sure, like he has yak ability and things like that, which we like. He's a 5th-year guy that is catching the ball around the line of scrimmage. It's just not. That's not what I want.
Oh, I get it. I mean, going back to last year, we're not talking about a gunslinger in Bo Nix, but he was more efficient. He was more explosive last year. I mean, he wasn't like on a Troy Franklin type of trajectory or anything last year, but I mean, he's still very good coming into that season, that team without really a lot of opportunity to practice with them. He just came right in and was a pretty effective guy. But no, I get the concerns for sure with him. He's going to be a slot guy at the next level, and he's probably going to be a limited upside guy as well. So yeah, you're kind of right to throw some caution to the wind as far as how high do we want to pump up a guy with that type of a profile.
Yeah, and the only other name I want to add, because I think you basically touched on everyone else that was on my list. I'm trying to look real quick. Yeah, because everyone else is going to be a 26 or 27 guy. But I know this is a player that we've talked. I've mentioned multiple times over the past couple of years, and you've never been on board, and you're clearly still not on board because you just listed like what 8-10 guys, something like that, and you did not mention his name. But I feel like Dane Key does not get enough love for what he's done in a not good offense. He has 587 receiving yards on 39 receptions in an offense that has only passed for 1,329 yards. Like I think the argument that you always made, or other people that were out on Dane Key was saying like it just was an athleticism thing, that you didn't feel like he was going to be athletic enough for the NFL, things like that. Maybe you've changed your opinion. I don't know. But I always go back to the yards per reception thing. It's a very basic stat. It's a very generic stat, but it really has a lot of viability. Is showing, can a player get down the field? Can the player move? Catch a ball and then run down the field. If you have 11 yards per reception, you're probably not getting down the field that much. You have 15 yards per reception, you probably are. If you have 20, you definitely are. Like that kind of thing. It's pretty simple. And sometimes these simple stats just, tell us enough. And he's sitting here this year at 15.1 yards per reception. And then over the past couple of years, it's 14.7. So, I mean, it shows me that like he's not some burner. He's not going to go, like burn a DB or anything like that. But it's showing that he can get down the field in a not good offense with not a good quarterback, with not good quarterback play. He's still getting down the field and having some, decent plays. His ADOT is good enough. Like everything about it, even you want to get into like the yards per team pass attempt, the PPR points per touch, over 3 yards per team pass attempt, 2.7 market share, 44.2% this year. I mean, a lot of things that are standing out for Dane Key, and yet, like I said, you've never really been the biggest fan, so I wonder if I could change your mind at all on him.
Well, I'll say that I'm okay with you listing him with some of those guys, or adding him in there. So no pushback for that. How much is the NFL going to want a guy like that who's just, coming off a very, pedestrian season for the most part because of the quarterback play? Yes, but that also hurts how much recognition he's going to get for sure. And he's just still a guy where, like you said, he is catching the ball down the field, but I never really see him doing a lot with it. Once he has it in his hands, he'll catch it, but I just don't necessarily see the projection after that, or the ability to do a ton after that. And the team issue, that's one aspect of things. I would say that Berrien Brown, I just expected him to, because he's the more explosive weapon, yes, but Berrien has not been good. He has not put it together. He's definitely a clear faller in this class. He's part of this class. He should be mentioned, but at this point, Dane Key has been way more consistent than him. Yeah, so that's another reason. And I never liked the quarterback play there to continue to develop and help Key out. So, if he was in a different system, maybe I'd be acting a little bit different, but 500 some yards this season. He's never really went over 636 yards in a season thus far. I get that we don't want to overemphasize the counting stats by any means, but Yeah, I mean, he deserves to at least, get his name out there. How high will he ever be in this class? That's always been my concern, and the reason I've defaulted to some other guys who I think have slightly higher upsides.
I mean, we have to give him a little bit of credit because his first year he had Will Levis throwing to him, and we know who Will Levis is in the NFL and how terrible he is. So I mean, we can almost probably triple his yardage, and that's what it would be with like a decent quarterback. So I mean, he basically had 1,500 yards in his true freshman season if we use the Will Levis line and give him a little boost there.
I love it. But with that logic, Tez Johnson would have had 20 yards per reception last year if he wasn't playing with Bo Nix, right? So,
Right.
I love it.
But I think that's enough. I think we basically
Yeah.
mentioned all of the players that matter, and in this upcoming class, obviously we have to mention Dorian Singer, as a possible player there. Last name, always got to be in the mix, but we'll see if he comes out, what happens with that. But why don't we try to get a little bit of excitement for the 2026 class, 2027 class. I think it might be a little difficult, but there's definitely some names that are pretty exciting. Obviously, we can talk about Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams to start us out. That's going to be for the 2027 class, of course. But just going with the top tier, they're the easy top tier, top names. I actually had Ryan Williams kind of like almost in like a tier of his own up until recently. He's kind of slowed down the past couple of games. I think it's more of a Jalen Milroe thing, but like he's definitely slowed down. And Jeremiah Smith has had some big games, so now they're essentially tied in Devy Beth. And so I mean, you can almost say like they're just pick your poison. Whichever one you like. Do you like the small shifty guy, or do you like the more of the prototypical Ohio State player and like that kind of thing? But they're putting up a lot of like I'm looking at their market share right now. Their market share is almost the same. Their PPR points per touch is 4.01 and 4.09. It's just like it's so close for both players. Like I said, pick your poison, whatever you want. But those are the top tier guys. And I mean, do you want to do just the 26 class and just the 27, or are you okay with throwing it or mixing it all together?
The 2026 class is so gross that you skipped over it and you're like, I just got to go to the 27 because
Pretty much, yeah.
it's so bad. Yeah. I mean, no, I think that it's fair to mention those guys because those are the next players up in future years that you really want to pay attention to at the wide receiver position. There's plenty of other guys that we could talk about here who have upside, but who is the most proven? Well, even though they're true freshmen, we have a pretty small sample thus far. Both of them are studs. Not much has changed there as far as them being 1A, 1B type of deal, however you want to rank that. Yeah, that has not changed for me. I still love them both. I will say the one 2026 guy that we should highlight, and he's not on the same tier as them, no, and he doesn't play on a high profile team or a prolific offense like them, no. But as a guy we both like, Eric Singleton Jr., Georgia Tech wide receiver, and
Yep.
now his starting quarterback's been out the last 2 weeks. That's kind of hurts him. I mean, Eric Singleton Jr. is going to be one of those guys. He probably flies underneath the radar. He's never going to be quite as sexy as a Ohio State or an Alabama wide receiver, or even like a Texas wide receiver, Clemson wide receiver. Like you go down the list of those teams that just put out some great wide receiver prospects historically. But I mean, Eric Singleton Jr. is doing some great things again this season, and we know his talent. He's a very fast player. He's a track star. He is somebody who is versatile as well. So he's not just a straight line type of guy. He's not just a trick play type of guy either. So I like the trajectory that he's on. We want to see these guys at least continue on after a promising freshman season. And I think Singleton Jr. is doing that versus like a Cardinal Tate. He's kind of fallen off because we just see that he's not nearly as talented as Jeremiah Smith or as a Emeka Egbuka. And again, it's not saying like a Cardinal Tate in the 2026 class is trash. Like he could have day 2 draft capital and be Michael Pittman Jr. I think that is a very realistic outcome for him, but I'm not like tripping over myself to go and draft Cardinal Tate in any drafts right now.
Well, it's tough because he just had a huge game where he actually, I think he led the team in receiving yardage. Tate did. So it's tough because he actually just moved back up in Devy Beth because of this past week. But before that, like you said, he really wasn't doing much. But I mean, it's kind of to be expected. I mean, you have Jeremiah Smith, who we're saying is at least a top 2 guy in all of Devy, and then you have Emeka Egbuka, who we already said was one of the highest guys in the 2025 class. So to be expected, the Carnell Tate is not going to produce as much, but there's things like teammate score and all that kind of stuff that play into it, which is going to keep him higher. I actually have Singleton and Tate almost back to back, so like I like the call out there, but I actually have a player that's moved ahead of both of them. And as high, how high I was on Singleton. So for somebody to move ahead of him, although it has not been the perfect season for Singleton, but for somebody to move ahead of him, I'm getting excited about him. It's a player that I've mentioned before, but it's just more of the same this year, and it's Jace Brown out of Kansas State. He's actually moved up ahead of Singleton and Carnell Tate for me, and it's just a little bit of everything. He's sitting there at 31% market share for the season. The PPR points per touch are over 3.5. Let's see here. Yeah, yards per reception 17.3. I love that. He's a down the field threat, and 13.4 ADOT. So a little, definitely more of a down the field kind of player. Kansas State is not the best offense out there or anything like that, so he's not going to have these like 1,500 yard seasons or anything like that. But when you're looking at the 30% market share and all that kind of stuff, he is earning the share of his own offense. He's doing the best he can in that offense, basically. Now obviously Aaron was definitely shocked when I said Jace Brown because I could tell from his face. But I mean, it's a player that we both liked in the offseason. He just seems to have moved up maybe a little higher for me than he has for you.
No, I mean, it's not that. It's just that, I mean, John, you are the bearer of great news. I appreciate you. I have him on 75% of my Campus Canton rosters, so
Oh wow.
I like the news there. I do. I just didn't think that, that was coming. But you know what? That's why you look at these things from a share standpoint, not just a raw counting stats standpoint, because Kansas State has not been that great throwing the ball by any means. And, Jace Brown has still been a consistent part of that offense, and he's trending in the right direction. That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, I love to see it. He's a pretty versatile player, and, a player that should fit into today's NFL. That's for sure. So
it might be boring when it might be boring when I say it, like over and over again, but like I love these guys that just take over the offense, and he's that guy. He has 518 yards. The next closest guy has 264. Then the next closest guy after that has 90. He's their offense. He's their receiving offense, and they've only thrown for 1,700 passing yards. So the fact that he has 518 there just shows like he is dominating the market share. He's dominating the targets. He's dominating all that kind of stuff. The 17.3 yards per reception shows athleticism to me. The down the field ADOT shows athleticism as well. The PPR points per touch, like all that kind of stuff. So like I just love what I'm seeing. And not an extremely exciting class. I think that Jace Brown is actually underrated, which is saying something, because that means you can probably go get him right now before people like truly figure it out.
Yeah, no, I like that. And kind of going back to my Devy ranks, just I wanted to see where I had him. I definitely had him quite lower, but I had Carnell Tate actually still pretty high in the top 15. So, I mean, I guess definitely haven't dropped him too much, and Eric Singleton was just ahead there. So we do have some reason for optimism here with this 2026 class, though I think that we should quickly transition to 2027 because, man, some of those 2026 guys, not so pretty. You got Zachariah Branch, you got Eugene Wilson, you got Jonte Cook, you got KC Concepcion, Mekhi Lemon, I guess, he's getting a little bit relevant. Deuce Robinson, Jacoby Lane. It's like a lot of USC guys, right? That we had high hopes that one of them would hit. Well, maybe none of them will hit. I mean, Mekhi Lemon probably making the most splashes lately, from what I've heard, at least, right? I've been hearing some hype for what he's been doing, but this 27 class, the true freshman, that is where we're seeing some really, really great things out of the wide receiver position this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's where we can say that's the list. Like the 2026 players that have actually done anything. That's it. Like, and then we have some players. It's like, okay, like you said, Jonte Cook. I've been a big fan of. He's even looked okay in small spurts, but I mean, he doesn't seem to be able to get on the field full time, and it's just tough. And then these other players, like you were saying with the USC guys and everything. I've already mentioned how I'm not the biggest Zachariah Branch fan, and it just seems like they're falling off. However, we can be a little excited with these 2027 freshmen. It seems like one of the better, if not the best, recruiting or like true freshman class that we've seen in quite some time. Because seems it's pretty rare when we have guys like Bryant Wesco Jr., Nick Marsh, Ryan Wingo, TJ Moore, Cam Coleman. Like, there's so many players that we can mention have already broken year 1-0 theory, thresholds, have already, become the guy for their team. We were mentioning earlier how Isaiah Bond hasn't truly become the guy for his own team. Well, why do you think that is? Ryan Wingo's right there. He has almost as many yards as Isaiah Bond and all that as a true freshman. And he wasn't even supposed to be this stud player that was ready to go week one or anything like that. He was never really thought of that way, and yet he's gone out there and actually put up pretty solid numbers. So I think that we can get a little excited, even though it's a little scary with the 2026 and 27 classes. Maybe that 27 class will kind of save us.
Yeah, I think that there's that potential there, that's for sure. And I mean, just to run through some names here that guys who have personally impressed me a good amount. I mean, Ryan Wingo there at Texas, yep, for sure. TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco, that duo at Clemson, has looked very good. And Bryant Wesco's missed some games recently, so we have to take that into account and say he was on track to be like a pretty darn big threat there. TJ Moore is now taken over a little bit more of a role just because of injury. Not saying TJ Moore is bad. I mean, I still like both of them a whole lot. Cam Coleman there at Auburn, accompanied by Malcolm Simmons. And then, Perry Thompson's kind of lurking as that third guy who could have a promising future there at Auburn. We just right now it seems like Simmons and Cam Coleman are ahead of him, but that's promising, the fact that we have multiple Auburn wide receivers as freshmen doing some promising things after being promising recruits. And then we got Micah Hudson, Texas Tech, great recruit coming in. He's showing some life there at least. And we got Nick Marsh, Michigan State. You could go a little bit deeper. You go to Mazeo Bennett at South Carolina. He's done a few things this season in what is kind of an unspectacular passing offense. But again, see Jace Brown, see some of these other guys who, as long as you're putting up good shares, good involvement, and you continue to progress as players, I guess we shouldn't care too much where they're at for a team. And then who was I going to mention? Like Mario Craver, even for Mississippi State. Like, he's actually flashed. I kind of like some of his flashes, though I know that he's an underrated guy too. We could have mentioned him in our underrated section earlier as like a very deep guy, but I do like Mazeo Bennett, Mario Craver a little bit, in addition to Mazeo Bennett.
I like it. I was looking at Malcolm Simmons, and for some reason his market share average was messed up, and so I went and looked, and somehow he got like a 2023 market share added in there, and so I took that away, and he actually jumped up to wide receiver 38. So a lot, getting right up there to pretty close to that wide receiver 30 range that you had. So I'm with you on Simmons. He's definitely rising, and he's a name that people just really aren't talking about too much. I know Andy Stars has been talking about him recently. But it seems like you two are really one of the few that are actually like talking about, or two of the few that are actually talking about him as a somebody that we should be excited about for the 2027 class. And I think it's just because of that Auburn team. Like, people were excited about Cam Coleman, excited about Perry Thompson, excited about all these players, and yet maybe it's Malcolm Simmons when it's all said and done. Now I still have Cam Coleman higher in the ranks, but it's not by much. They're within 10 spots in my ranks, so it's not too much. It wouldn't take much for them to swap places or anything like that. But I think you did a good job of listing out all the freshmen that we could be excited about. But I think that the Bryant Wesco Jr., like you said, he's been missing time more recently, but like what he did in the beginning got us really excited. And so like that's a name that we should definitely be excited about. Nick Marsh is a player that like no one was really talking about in the class or like cared about in the class or anything like that. And yet, I mean, he's doing pretty big things. He has almost 500 receiving yards in his true freshman season. So definitely a player that I think we have to be pretty excited about when it's all said and done. Almost 3 PPR points per touch, 17 yards per reception, great, yards per team pass attempt, everything. Market shares right there. I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of Nick Marsh.
Yeah, he's been great, and he is actually somebody who contributor at Campus Academy, Dwight Peoples, actually was big Nick Marsh guy. So I got to give him some credit there. As a shout out. I think he's a fan of their team, but anyways,
sure.
That
Michigan
is great.
State, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think that Marsh has gotten enough love, like I said, in the whole recruit process. But even now, I feel like people, because it's Michigan State and it's not like the sexy team, sexy name, all that kind of stuff, that maybe he'll kind of fly under people's radars as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I hear you got a dog running around.
Oh yeah, this dog just got unleashed from the upstairs, and he's ready to play.
There's the pup. All right, well, I think that's our cue that it is time. It's we're sitting the hour and 40 mark, which is pretty much our average at this point. So that was pretty good timing anyway. Hopefully we didn't scare you off of the wide receivers too much, but I mean the truth of the matter is that it's a little more scary than it's been in the past. We're really gonna have to look for some of these diamonds in the rough, a la like a Dane Key or somebody that doesn't get enough love, and maybe you get them as like a 3rd, 4th round pick in your drafts, and they actually turn into something. I think that's gonna kind of be the key in the 2025 draft class is finding some of these diamonds in the rough players like that. So I think that is important. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We obviously enjoyed talking about it with you, and we will be back as soon as possible. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out.